Morning. Welcome to the Lynn Cancer Institute updates and what we all need to know in 2022. We're very grateful to have you all with us today and to learn from our very own oncology clinical dietitian, Marie Morande. Marie will be educating us today on gut health, a very popular topic. At the Lynn Cancer Institute, we believe that education, prevention, screening and early detection, treatment options, the expertise of our amazing staff, and our latest technology will truly save lives. In the interest of time, Marie's bio has been sent to you by email. Your Zoom will be muted during the presentation, so Marie will not be able to see you or hear you. So we encourage you to take notes and put any questions into the Q&A box or into the chat box. And at the end of the presentation, she'll be able to answer your questions. We're very happy to welcome you to the Lynn Cancer Institute and very proud to introduce Marie Morande. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you very much, Jan, and thank you everyone for attending this month's nutrition lecture on a healthy gut. So let's go ahead and get started. Sorry. There we go. So today we're going to kind of go over what our gut microbiome means, what influence this microbiome has on our health, what influences growth of the healthy microbiome, and what influence does the gut microbiome have on cancer and cancer treatments. So what's amazing to me is that we have a collection of over trillions of bacteria species that live in a symbiotic relationship in our human gut. So the number of bacteria cells actually outnumber our cells by a factor of 10. So imbalance of the gut bacteria is linked to many different conditions, including IBS or inflammatory bowel syndrome, obesity, even diabetes, and maybe many more, potentially even certain types of colon cancers. So initial gut colonization occurs in infants, and it is instrumental in shaping the gut environment as we age and go into adulthood. But that doesn't mean that we can't change the microbiome at any time. So symbiotic relationship and the benefit that we get from that relationship. Bacteria in our gut are able to perform many functions humans cannot or have limited ability to. So this includes producing vitamins, synthesizing different amino acids, which are the building block for protein, transforming bile. The intestinal cells interact with bacteria to influence our immune system. So bacteria bind and signal the immune system. So this can be beneficial and detrimental. But the microbiome metabolizes non-digestible carbohydrates. So polysaccharides, resistant starches, cellulose, pectins, gums, all the fiber in the food that we think of and provides recovery of energy and nutrients for bacterial growth. So they produce nutrients for us and we supply them with nutrients. The microbiome can produce antimicrobial compounds to compete with pathogens. So they certainly add to our immune system and our immune responses to various pathogens in our environment. And there is a gut-brain communication which influences the gut function and response to stress. So a little bit more on these benefits that we get from our gut microbiome and our gut bacteria. The gut microbes are able to synthesize vitamin B12, thiamine, folate, riboflavin, vitamin K, possibly about 20% of circulating amino acids, lysine, leucine, threonine in adult humans are synthesized by our gut microbes. In addition, microbes are involved in urea nitrogen salvaging. So they will salvage that nitrogen, which is important for proteins development from our gut and recirculate that. Probably a very important function of the microbiota and one of the benefits that we gain for our health is this fermenting of the indigestible carbohydrates into various byproducts. And these byproducts are called short-chain fatty acids. Most popular, most abundant ones are butyrate, acetate, and propionate. Butyrate is an energy source for our human colon cells. It can induce apoptosis, which is called cell death for colon cancer cells, and it can activate intestinal gluconeogenesis, which helps to spur growth of our good colon cells, maintain oxygen balance, and prevent what's called dysbiose. Dysbiose is a very important concept we want to avoid. Dysbiose is an imbalance or disruption to what a healthy microbiome is. Propionate transfers to the liver to regulate gluconeogenesis and satiety. So we get benefits on how full we feel from that short chain fatty acid. And then acetate may also regulate our appetite and influence cholesterol and lipid regulation, and is used by the skeleton and the cardiac muscles. So all of these and many more benefits come from these short chain fatty acids. Essentially, the more short chain fatty acid production can lead not actually to less obesity and less insulin resistance, among other things, and a healthier colon and a healthier gut. So what the microbiota are fermenting makes a difference. So if we're fermenting meat and dairy, meaning that we have a diet high in meat, animal fats, and dairy products, then trimethylamine, which is oxidized by the liver, is a more common byproduct of that fermentation, but that can be associated with increased risk of atherosclerosis and heart disease. So that's not particularly the benefit that we want. Fermenting dietary fiber produces idylpropionic acid and butyrate, which is a potent, a very good free radical scavenger, which seems to reduce the risk and incidence of diabetes, among other things. Butyrate has anti-inflammatory effects. Certainly, we've talked about the benefits of anti-inflammatory in the past. It maintains a gut barrier, which is ever so important for good gut health, and reduces oxidative stress in the gut. So butyrate would be a beneficial short chain fatty acid produced from that fermenting of the dietary fiber. A high fat diet contributes to more lipopolysaccharides, which can transverse the gut and increase inflammation. So again, that fat, that meat, that dairy, unfortunately, have a little bit less benefits to our gut than the fiber products that the microbiome can ferment. As I mentioned, the gut talks to the brain and the brain talks back. So stress has been shown to influence the integrity of the gut. And many people may not realize that when they're worried and anxious and sad and depressed, they're changing the integrity of their gut. It can alter peristalsis, meaning it changes how fast or slow things move through the gut. It changes the secretions, that mucus lining, which is so very important in our immune system in keeping pathogens out and in good integrity, and the mucin production. So probiotic consumption also has been reported to reduce even self-reported feelings of sadness and aggressive thoughts. So the opposite actually can be true also. A good healthy gut can have beneficial effects to our own feelings and reduce that stress or anxiety. Stress-induced gut changes in permeability, and the mucus lining of the gut increases inflammation and damage to that gut. So people who are worried about conditions like the IBS or Crohn's or other gut conditions, may want, controlling the stress is a big factor, and then also supporting a good healthy microbiome can reduce those symptoms. So they've looked into irritable bowel syndrome, and which is characterized by abdominal discomfort, pain, changes in the bowel habits, certainly. And it is influenced by a multitude of factors in the gut, including inflammation, genetics, hypersensitivity to certain foods or nutrients, histories of infection, and of course the microbiome in that gut. So alterations in the composition of the gut may facilitate adherence to pathogens and development of IBS symptoms. So they've done some recent studies looking at the microbiome of patients starting vedolizumab, which is a medication treatment for IBS, and found that those patients who had a more diverse microbial composition at the start of treatment was predicted a week 14 in their study clinical remission. So the people who had a better variety in their the diversity in their microbiome did better on the medication, which is very interesting. Especially the butyrate producing bacteria at baseline specifically were higher in those achieving remission from their IBS symptoms over time. So a multifactorial, multidisciplinary approach to these kind of syndromes can be beneficial, not only looking at the medication treatment for such a disease, but also looking at the diet and the effect that has on microbiome is also important. So also in the case of people with IBS, there is a specific carbohydrate diet called the low Fodmap diet, which has become very popular in the recent decade. And it may help alleviate symptoms also. It is believed that malabsorption of simple sugars or specific types of sugars in people with IBS contribute to this excessive fermentation by the colon. The short chain fatty acid produced overstimulate free fatty acids receptors, resulting in kind of change in the motility and the sensitivity of the colon. So the low FODMAP diet is a very restrictive diet. It does restrict specifically, and the name actually is an anagram for what it restricts. It restricts fructose, oligosaccharides, disaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. So that's what that FODMAP stands for. So in English terms, it's restricting gluten, lactose, and some very specific fruits and vegetables. And there's a whole long list of different kinds of websites out there for the FODMAP diet if you're really interested in doing this as a child to help control symptoms. I know a couple of things that are always encouraged. I've always encouraged my patients, one, to be actually very strict with the diet for a good 2 to 3 weeks and see if it is of any benefit to you. It may or may not be. And then, if you can certainly add foods back in gradually to see if it helps. The FODMAP diet is helpful for certain people with the IBS symptoms. I've been asked in the past a lot about this concept of leaky gut. So leaky gut, this terminology is controversial. There are people out there and doctors out there who's not exactly sure if it's a true diagnosis. But the idea here is the leaky gut refers to a reduction in the tight junctions between cells of the GI tract. In this sense, if the GI tract is weak if all the cells aren't right next to each other, nice and tightly. Then you can get space, which particles, food material, microbes can enter directly into the body and, of course, cause inflammation or allergic reactions. So factors that can influence the junction health is the H. pylori, which is a factor in ulcers and stomach problems. Gluten, for those who are gluten sensitive, may contribute to this oversensitivity reaction. And the alcohol, stress, certainly, as we mentioned, stress can reduce those mucus lining production and the mucin layers of the GI tract. Age, of course, inflammatory bowel disease, already having some kind of inflammation disorder of the gut will impact the tight junctions of this. So when we look into this and the what foods are problematic as far as the gut integrity, we look at artificial sweeteners, and we looked at highly processed foods. And highly processed foods have a lot of additives, which are a problem, a lot of sugars and dyes and salt. The gluten, as I mentioned, if a person is sensitive, and then potentially the red meat itself. And the foods that may help and benefit the gut integrity, bone broth, very interestingly, with the glutamine and collagen as source of amino acids. Fermented foods, of course, to establish that good, healthy microbiome, which can have a benefit to that gut integrity. Foods high in fiber to stimulate that biodiversity. Omega-3 foods, which omega-3 is those fish oils, those healthy fats from not only fish oils and fish, but also walnuts and flaxseed, canola oil, those kind of things. And then turmeric as an anti-inflammatory agent. Mushrooms, of course, we've talked about the benefits of turmeric and mushrooms in the past, and of course, green tea as well. Potentially Lactobacillus plantarum and Bifidobacterium specifically. Both of those are found in a probiotic VSL number 3, which is a very diverse, good probiotic supplement. When people talk about leaky gut, there seem the conversation of lectins comes up, and lectins, Plant Paradox book that came out from Dr. Gundry, really kind of put lectins on the chopping block as far as dangerous, but I'm not convinced. I don't think it's really true. There is some research on limiting lectins and adding probiotics in the management of autoimmune disease, but in most of the other research he references in his book is not actually true or scientific research. And the interesting thing also is some of the research he refers back to actually doesn't support what he's saying. So we do know that beans and whole grains, some of the foods that he talks about being bad because of their high in lectins, have been shown to be beneficial in a wide range of diseases. We know some of these foods support the healthy microbiome, which can be good for the gut and for various different health disorders. So I'm not convinced at all that we need to worry about lectins. And in fact, I would highly encourage people to be doing whole grains, which doesn't have to be gluten. It can be quinoa, it can be buckwheat, it can be some of these nice ancient grains. Beans and lentils. Certainly you do want to cook beans very well. There is research that says if you eat beans that are undercooked or too raw, that it can be a problem. So you want some well-cooked beans, and you don't lose any of the health benefit by cooking those beans. So in research and look into obesity and diabetes, there seems to be a relationship between an altered microbiome and obesity versus normal weight. They did some studies in mice. showing preference to different types of bacteria in the gut, the firmicutes versus the bacteroidetes. And the firmicutes are very efficient at extracting energy from diet. So then we're going to get more calories out of our diet when we support those type of microbiome. So this relationship can be altered on fat restricted or carbohydrate restricted diets or intermittent fasting. So studies have found that during times of fasting, we can increase bacteroidetes and less firmicutes. So certainly there has been a lot of information and push on the intermittent fasting, which, you know, I've certainly tried and certainly worth a try for some people. This may be an additional benefit there. Production of short-term fatty acids from the microbiome relate to signaling along the gut for satiety and regulation of food intake. So if you remember, those butyrate-producing bacteria, by fermenting the plant foods and the high fiber foods, was able to influence that feeling of fullness, or satisfaction from eating, which is our satiety, and regulation of food intake or behaviors. So gut composition of study patients with diabetes showed that some dysbiose and decrease in short-chain fatty acid production kind of contributed to their diabetes. So certainly a low diversity correlates with weight gains. Certainly going back to our recommendations as far as weight management, which is high fiber foods that are very filling and certainly would support this healthy microbiome, and low fat foods so that we're not fermenting those fatty acids into the wrong type of microbiota or the short chain fatty acid altered short chain fatty acid production. So there are many pathways for communication between the gut and the brain. And, these include cytokines and hormones, and neurotransmitters. All of this kind of crosses over to the brain. And as I mentioned before, can impact memory or anxiety or stress. Carbohydrate fermentation has been linked to brain health as far as being beneficial. And in relation to colorectal cancer, studies do link poor diversity, dysbiose in the gut from infections and antibiotic use, and which all can increase the risk of colon cancer. So there are several byproducts of gut that directly target our colon cells and either mediate cancer growth or cancer suppression, which is very interesting. So certainly, as I mentioned before, what we're eating and what we're fermenting from our what the microbiome is fermenting makes an impact on that direct health of the gut, along with our overall health. So not just gut colon cancers, but breast, liver, due to the inflammation factors, and metabolic means potentially related to systemic distribution of bacterium byproducts that compromise the integrity. So a lot of other cancer concerns. So it certainly is very important to, be aware and support that healthy microbiome. And even during treatment, for people who are on treatment, the effective cancer treatments can exert a toxic effect on our gut microbiome. They can cause this imbalance, this dysbiose, radiation therapy, transplant treatments, different types of medications can be toxic to that gut, and certainly add to unwanted side effects to the GI tract. The gut microbiome can also influence the efficiency or efficacy of chemo, including the irinotecan can be reactivated in the gut, contributing to some of those side effects. Dysbiose contributes to infections and intestinal graft versus host disease. So for people We don't do a lot of transplants here at Lynn, but for people who are under that treatment, supporting a good microbiome or diversity in the gut can help reduce the risk of those gut-related graft versus host disease. The full effect of oxaliplatinum involves the detection of components of gut microbiome to generate tumor-infiltrating myeloid. So there's certainly influence of different medications along with the gut microbiome. So pharmacological manipulation of the gut holds great promise as adjuvant to improve therapeutic effects of treatment. And certainly we need more research, but supporting different type of microbiota in the gut, hopefully we can establish a beneficial symbiotic relation there with our cancer treatments. One example is our immune therapy. So for people who are on immune therapy, the one specific study was specific to the melanoma immune therapy, the anti-PD-1 checkpoint blockade medications. So for those starting on this treatment, and for people who also had the most diverse gut microbiome, had better responses, up to 5 times more likely to respond to the immunotherapy. So this study, the probiotic supplementation was not associated with the best diversity. The diversity was associated with the high fiber diet. So again, the food that we eat and what fuel we're giving to all of the microbiome in our gut can establish a better diversity than a probiotic supplement, which might be 1 or 2 species of bacteria, which you're not really impacting that diversity from. So other studies with immunotherapy found poor effectiveness in people who had recently taken antibiotics, meaning the antibiotics they took kind of disrupted or caused that imbalance to the microbiome. And unfortunately, they didn't have that as great of a response to the immune therapy. So I think it's very important if and when we can, if you're starting immune therapy or going into that, really kind of focusing on the diet that would support a more diverse microbiome. So kind of just a little bit of an illustration. The factors in red are related more to disease and a poor, lower diverse microbiome. So in here it's sugars and excessive protein intake, saturated fat intake, antibiotics and proton pump inhibitors. All of these kind of decrease that diversity, decrease that short chain fatty acid production, and has been associated with increased risk of cardiovascular disease, gut inflammation, even cognitive decline, as we mentioned, with that brain-gut relationship, and insulin resistance, and increased risk of diarrhea. When we start introducing the dietary fiber, the probiotic supply, increased antioxidants, we have that increased short chain fatty acid production, improved lipid metabolism, less inflammation, and better insulin sensitivity, meaning we can use our sugars more efficiently and better, and reduce risk of infection. So certainly there's a lot going on here, but supporting that healthy gut can have extensive effects on our health. So what does influence that gut microbiome growth? So what can we do to kind of support that healthy gut? So there are many external and internal factors. The microbial load in the environment, our environment, has different type of bacteria in them, the type of food we eat, obviously, the feeding habits, and temperature. Internal intestinal pH, the environment that peristalsis, or that movement of the gut, bile acids, different drugs we're on, in the bacterial mucosal receptors. So the influence of foods that we eat on the microbiome probably is the most control that we have on that diversity. So as we mentioned, artificial sweeteners, animal studies showed that disrupt the microbiome balance and diversity, and it can increase pro-inflammatory genes and metabolites. So food additives, emulsifiers, so things that you're going to get from a lot of processed foods reduce gut diversity and increase inflammation, promoting more unhealthy proteobacteria. And restrictive diets. So, there's a lot of restrictive diets out there: raw food, clean eating, gluten-free, low fiber diets, and they're often promoted as being healthy and benefiting our health. But when we restrict too much components to our diet, you can potentially impact the microbiome and that diversity and those fuel sources for the gut bacteria. So in increasing our intake of things like resistant starches and fiber in the diet we know can enrich that microbiome. Resistant starches can enrich the bacterial groups in people, which will be favorable to the microbiome. Fiber in the diet can significantly impact our GI microbiome, but only as much as it's included in our diet. The low fiber intake reduces short chain fatty acids, leading to more detrimental metabolites and degrading that colon barrier, and causing inflammation. And certainly the high fat diets, as we said, can impact the mucus layer and make things a little bit more leaky, so to speak, as we mentioned. So we mentioned resistant starches, and we mentioned high fiber foods. So resistant starches is an interesting concept. It's very much like a fiber. What happens is there are certain types of starches in foods that resist digestion, okay? So they are maybe considered a type of fiber, not quite listed as a fiber, but they resist digestion and they come into the colon and are able to be fermented by those microbiome. So these are foods like certain types of grains, specifically on oats, pumpernickel, and like a pearl barley. Seeds can have resistant starches. Legumes and lentils and peas and corn can have resistant starches. Raw potatoes, not everybody eats raw potatoes. Plantains, certainly, and green bananas. So like unripe, and as a banana ripens and becomes more yellow, you're going to have those resistant starches activate and become more digestible starch. So, the more unripe, so to speak, you can eat a banana, the better. And this is an interesting concept, which I found very interesting. Potatoes and rice that are cooked and then cooled, okay? So you cook potatoes, cool them off, and then maybe reheat, or same thing with rice. You develop these resistant starches in the food, which can benefit our microbiome. So, of course, other high fiber foods in general: peas, broccoli, greens, Brussels sprouts, different berries like raspberries, pears and apples, strawberries, raw carrots, cauliflower, like I said, seeds like chia seeds and quinoa are all high fiber foods that can kind of support that healthy diversity. So we want to eat that high fiber diet full of prebiotics and probiotics. The prebiotics are these fibers and these starches that will fuel the microbiome. So in addition to the things we talked about, darkly green leafy vegetables, onions and garlic, Soybeans, artichokes is a really great one for as a prebiotic. Beets, sweet potatoes, butternut squash, apricots and cherries, kale and pineapple. And then there's the fermented foods, which is very interesting. Fermented foods offer a more diverse source of probiotics. We talked about a probiotic supplement and being, maybe just a few species. So fermented foods like kombucha can have maybe up to 50 different probiotic strains versus a pill supplement that might only have a few. So other fermented foods, of course, is yogurt, kefir, sauerkraut, kimchi, tempeh, miso. So, synergy or pilot kombuchas are good. And kombuchas, if you've never heard of it, is a fermented, usually green tea drink. Becomes a little effervescent. And that fermenting process is usually done through a starter culture, the green tea, and then some kind of source of sugar. Now, my preference when I buy a kombucha is that they're using some kind of fruit juice rather than a sugar or corn syrup, of course. So definitely find the ones that are made with fruit juices. Of course, then you have your yogurt and yogurt drinks, like Siji's plant-based probiotic yogurt. Of course, you have kefir also as a fermented drink. And then there are probiotic shots, different kinds of, there's a brand out there, Sunnyculture turmeric, ginger probiotic shot. Suja has an immunity or a digestive shot that also includes turmeric and ginger. And certainly those are good for our GI tract as well, along with the fermented part of that drink. There's of course sauerkraut and fermented vegetables, miso and kimchi. So all of these things should be included in our diets to provide a source of good probiotics and good bacteria. So as we mentioned, we want to replace saturated and trans fats with our omega-3 fats from our fish or flaxseed or olives or nuts. And other influences, actually going out in the sun for short periods of time. We don't want to burn, but we want to support that production of vitamin D. Because vitamin D has been shown to increase our gut microbiome diversity. We also want to stay hydrated, of course, to keep those cells of the GI tract moist and support that mucous membrane and mucin. And the interesting thing is changes in our diet can change the microbiome within days. So even though we mentioned in the beginning that we establish our microbiome in infancy and in our early years, that can actually be changed fairly easily and have a lasting effect on our health. So this is something certainly that you can do today and improve not only maybe your health, tolerance to treatment, and long-term, right away. So future direction, certainly we need more analysis of the gut microbiome that may predict patients likely to have immunotherapy colitis, probiotic mixtures that are ideal for best response to cancer treatment. That would be a great thing to know. Right now, we don't know specific species or combination of species that would support some of these benefits. The best thing we can do, like right now, like I said, is supporting the diversity. Using a microbiome and diet algorithms to predict glycemic responses to meals or better control of blood sugar, that would be a great future direction as far as research goes. They do a lot of studies with fecal transplants and treatment for C. diff and obesity and Alzheimer's and other diseases. So, further exploration of that, where, maybe we could do a transplant of a different type of microbiome and support weight loss. That would be fabulous for some people. So new technology for personalized characterization of the gut to to manipulate that biome favorably. So that would be great as far as future directions in this thing. So thank you very much, everyone, for attending. And I'm sure everybody has a lot of questions that I need to get to, right, Jen?
Yes.
I see.
So do you want to see them or do you want me to read them?
I think I can read them.
Okay.
Oh, I was going a little bit too fast. I apologize for that. I will actually, so you can absorb it, I will supply the slides to Jan and Lee, and they can send that out with their email that they send out with the survey. So you can read all of the slides again and review that. Right, too much time. I do apologize. I do get a little technical at times. What does Fodmap stand for? That stands for fructo oligosaccharides, fructo oligosaccharides. I had it all in front of me. Monoglycerides and polyols. I believe I mentioned that as well. So it's an abbreviation for those certain types of simple sugars that we get from different types of foods. No, I did not say that lectins are problematic. Actually, I don't support that theory. I know there's a very popular book out about the lectins, but I don't think it has been corroborated as far as the research and findings from that book. And we know that certain foods that are high in lectins are very beneficial to us. Like I said, whole grains and beans and lentils and those types of foods. So no, they are not problematic. SCFA stands for short chain fatty acids, and those are the byproducts of the fermentation of the bacteria in our gut, and those are the compounds that give us most of our health benefit from the relationship with the bacteria in our gut. Yes, I will send you a copy of the presentation. Okay, so as far as my services, myself and the other dietitian, Brandy, are available to patients who are on treatment or within a year from their treatment here at Lynn Cancer Institute. If not, there are certainly other dietitians in the community that you can reach out to. Adjuvant means after. Dysbiose is probably the most important there, and that's a disruption to the microbiome diversity or an alteration in the balance. So dysbiose may mean that there's more detrimental bacteria versus helpful or good bacteria in our system, or just an overall low diversity. Okay. Yes. So could you clarify raw diet might not be good? The reason why that came up as far as a raw diet not being good is because the raw diet actually restricts quite a bit of different types of foods, which any diet that restricts that diversity in what we eat or limits things like, say, grains or cooked beans or different kinds of foods can impact what fuel sources we have for the bacteria in our gut. Certainly that we encourage the plant-based diet And a plant-based diet is going to be a diet that has an abundance of fruits and vegetables, an abundance of beans and lentils as far as plant proteins, along with maybe chicken and fish, because we know fish is good as far as omega-3 fats to support overall health. And including whole grains and including, a lot of the foods that we just talked about that provide a good fuel source for this gut bacteria, and just in general, we know support overall health. So, without significant restrictions, I've heard diets that restrict, any kind of grain, or restrict any kind of nuts, or restrict any cooked foods. In that sense, you may not gain the benefit from all foods that are out there. So, and I think there was Q&A. I mean, salted nuts are okay. Actually, I think there's a lot more sodium in other foods than salted nuts, depending on how much you eat, of course. Salting part depends on your sodium, your blood pressure, all that kind of stuff, but certainly nuts are a good idea. It's taking a colonoscopy, destroy your gut bacteria. And not that I know of, certainly you're emptying your system out, but that is more of that laxative to remove the waste. So it doesn't come up in my research as far as a colonoscopy, the disrupting. And like I said, if you do take a colonoscopy, you go back to a nice healthy diet and include these good healthy foods, you'll reestablish that gut, fairly quickly. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for attending. I know I got a little too scientific-y at times, but I appreciate you guys being here and listening and participating. And thank you very much for all of your great questions.
Thank you, Marie. I did put in the chat box that if anybody has questions afterwards, they can just send it to us by email and we can forward them on to you, because I'm sure as people, especially after they re-look at your slides and, possibly re-look at the lecture, might have more questions.
Absolutely.
And anyone that's a patient, as Marie said, can schedule their appointment. So again, we thank you all for attending. This was, Marie, the amount of research is just mind-boggling. And so, to use a pun, this is a lot to digest, but I think we all need it and appreciate it. And thank you so much for your presentation and all your research. As I said, this presentation was recorded, so you will be able to see it again. Marie will also send the slides, so you'll have a lot of reference material. Lee will send out an evaluation form, and along with that form, she sends a link. So when this lecture is up on our website, you'll be able to access it and re-look at it. I just wanted to let you know for February, we have a couple of presentations coming up. One, I think it's going to be pretty exciting. It's going to be it's for World Cancer. It's a celebration of World Cancer Day on Friday, February 4th. And it's going to be kind of an overview of our Lynn Cancer Institute and everything that is provided to our patients here. And it'll show you how we truly, our quest is to treat the whole patient. And so we hope that you'll tune into that. And the other great part of that will be that it'll be our own Dr. Morelle doing the presentation. So we all know how fabulous she is. And then at the end of the month, Marie is going to do another nutrition presentation, and it'll be moving on after cancer based on nutrition. And as with all of our presentations, this education obviously benefits our cancer patients, but it's also good information for all of us, just in general, or for cancer prevention. So thank you all for attending. Thank you, Marie, and everyone have a great afternoon. Bye-bye.